Hello all, this is another video on the series called Visiting Valens that I'm doing with Lars Panaro on Hellenistic Astrology. Welcome Lars.
Thanks, Aswin.
Thank you so much, and it has been a very good ride so far exploring the Hellenistic stuff, and for me it's too early days and I've already been enjoying a lot. And I've been finding a lot of similarities in Vedic and Hellenistic astrology and the richness that the ancient astrology actually offers. So today we are going to be talking about the planets and basic significations from what the second century astrologer Vettius Valens from the Hellenistic tradition gives us. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll directly jump into it.
Sounds great. I'm going to share my screen here.
Sure.
So we can look at a couple diagrams. So some of you may already be familiar with probably most of you watching are, but this is just the rulership table. And I just, found this on searching Google and whatnot. And, as you can see, it's the same as, like Jyotish or Indian astrology, if you're into that. It's, we start here with the sun and the moon. And then we move out one sign from each, and Mercury rules. Move out another sign, Venus rules. And then so on, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So basically, much of Hellenistic astrology and the techniques surrounding it are going to come out of this. The doctrine of aversion, or like dark houses that we'll cover when we cover houses, will come out of this. And the aspects come out of this too, the nature of the aspects, right? We have a sextile from moon to Venus, sun to Venus. So the sextile is like Venus. And then we have a square to Mars from both lights, right? And so Mars is like the square. And then we have a trine from Jupiter to both lights, like that. And so Jupiter's like the trine, and then Saturn's like the opposition. And so this is important to remember because it helped the Hellenistic astrologers to sort of like refine their judgments and add weight to things. If Saturn or Mars were in a square or opposition aspect with something, then it compounded their natural sort of malefic power. Whereas if Jupiter or Venus were in trine or sextile to something, it compounded their natural benefic power and qualities. And so these are things we'll probably return to. There's a veritable gold mine of information about astrology and how the planets function and how the dignities function and all kinds of things contained in this diagram. And so maybe at some point we'll return to it or do a separate video on it. But it's pretty cool. And so and the last thing to mention real quick is that this is also based loosely upon the speed of the planets and the proximity of those planets to the sun, right? Mercury is the closest to the sun and fastest, so he's first. And then Venus is second closest, second fastest. And it moves out until we get Saturn, which is the coldest, darkest planet, furthest from the sun, furthest from the earth that we can see with the eye, right? And then so he's associated with the darkest kind of aspect of embodied consciousness, so he's opposite both the lights. Then that's what they're called in ancient Hellenistic astrology. They're called the lights. And so that's also important to remember. They're not planets. They have a unique way of participating in the scheme of astrology.
Yeah.
So did you want to say anything about that, Ashwin?
That's the thing that I wanted to talk about as well.
Cool.
The astronomical factor that they bring in terms of assigning rulerships to the zodiac signs is basically based upon the relative distance from the luminaries and the speed at which a planet moves across the zodiac, and that's the actual premise of what we are talking now. So
right.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it.
Cool. Yeah. And that's a good point too, to reiterate. You just kind of made it clearer that this is what defines the rulership scheme. And so this is why when modern astrologers say, oh, Neptune rules Pisces and Pluto rules Scorpio, it doesn't really make sense, because in this ancient doctrine, the planets are basically creating the signs, because each planet, if you notice, rules two signs, with the exception of the sun and the moon, which are basically a binary. They're two halves of a whole. And in Hellenistic astrology, they're very often interchangeable, especially when it comes to certain techniques of assessing what's called the predominator in the chart, which perhaps we'll talk about in a later video. It's kind of an esoteric technique. So, but only esoteric because, it's not something that most people are familiar with. It's really, but anyway, so as you can see, like each planet is ruling two signs. And so the ancients described this as each planet rules a day house and a night house. And we've already discussed the concept of sect in another video. And so we kind of get that reiterated with, like, Venus's night house is Taurus, which is feminine, and her day house is Libra, which is considered masculine. Or you could say positive and negative, as in a polarity, a charge, So the same with all the planets. They have a day house and a night house. And when we talk more about additional factors of sect in some other video, we'll probably come back to this. So, okay, so moving on. Next, we have the thema Mundi, which is also going to help us to understand the planets. And this is showing the ascendant in Cancer, and every planet is basically in just like a ring around the chart like this. I believe that I could be wrong, but I thought there was another one. I thought there was another one where they were all in their exaltations, but maybe not. No, there's not. That's something else. But the what this is it was kind of like a teaching tool that Hellenistic astrologers would use to teach their students the basic principles, and it doesn't really have any bearing on, like, the houses per se. The planets are sort of just, again, they're just arranged as starting with the moon and sun as kind of one, and going in that same order that we talked about already, right? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So it's just sort of a different way of showing that. And the ascendant in Cancer is significant because Cancer was regarded by the Neoplatonic philosophers as basically the gate of matter, or like birth into matter, and Capricorn was regarded as like the gate of death, or the transition of the soul from matter. And so there's some philosophical things here, but there's not too much else I have to say. Did you want to say anything?
No, I think that's pretty much it. So do you want to just move into Valence's signification starting from sun? Or did you have something else before that?
Yeah, I just wanted to look at a couple more things real quick. Another diagram that's useful is the joys, and we'll be mentioning the joys as we talk about each planet. But if you refer to this diagram while you're watching this video, you'll see that this is the first house, right? And each planet is finding its joy in a particular house. And all this kind of does is to tell us that, Saturn has a lot in common with the 12th for the Hellenistic astrologers. Jupiter has a lot in common with the 11th, and so on. And again, we'll talk about that some more as we get into the planets. And then finally, let's see if I can just find it real quick. I just wanted to briefly mention the planetary exaltations in case you're not familiar with those. That's this image right here. And planets are exalted in these signs that you see them in here. And exaltation by the Hellenistic astrologers was considered the most powerful dignity a planet could be in. So they were really at their best and most powerful in those signs. But also sometimes Hellenistic astrologers would compare the exaltation lord of a sign to the regular lord. So for Cancer, they might look at both Moon and Jupiter and see which one's stronger. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And again, we'll probably talk about that more in depth in a later video. And the exaltations also have a very profound relationship with the yearly cycle, which is something I have talked about in an article I wrote some time ago. I need to recover that for people that are interested. But did you have anything to say about this before we moved on?
No, no, but yeah, I don't have anything. But it's good that you spoke about exaltation. Do you want to say about the debilitations as well?
Oh, yeah. The planets are debilitated in the signs opposite their exaltations. And they even have specific degrees within these signs, both exalted and debilitated, where they are most exalted or most debilitated, that we may talk about as well. But so if the sun basically, like the sun is in Libra, it's considered debilitated. This is the weakest a planet can be in terms of its zodiacal placement only, not counting its house placement or any other factors that can increase or decrease its power in a chart. So if you see a planet in its exaltation or debilitation, don't immediately jump to a good, bad, or, oh, I'm going to be king, or I'm going to be, you know, some kind of whorish peasant or something. It's not quite that simple. And any of you who practice traditional or astrology or Jyotish methods will already know that. So it's really no different in Hellenistic. And yeah, I think that'll do it.
I think there is also detriment, which is exactly the seventh sign from its domicile or rulership. So, which is basically because that particular planet um doesn't entirely get away or get along with the signification that its detrimental sign provides. So, detrimental,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I just want to cut in real quick. The detriment wasn't really used in earlier Hellenistic texts,
Okay.
and you find it loosely in Firmicus Maternus. But what he's talking about is if most of the planets are in signs opposite their domiciles. So if most of them, then that's significant. But it wasn't really a debility until like the later medieval era for some reason. And
It's not a
so
debility. It's not a very bad dignity as it is, but still, yeah.
yeah, well, there are certain Hellenistic factors that can change that. Like, for example, if Jupiter is in Gemini, where it's considered to be in detriment by the medieval astrologers, but if Jupiter is it's in a masculine sign, and if it has sect, and if it's above the horizon during a day chart, it's actually in pretty good condition. So, you know, just because it's in Gemini doesn't mean it's like down and out and that
Yeah,
kind of
sure,
a
sure.
thing.
There
So
are a
that's
lot of
just one
other.
example. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, just one quick example. But yeah, why don't we get into the planets themselves? Do you want me to share the PDFs I have on the screen while we talk about them, or stop screen sharing?
I don't know. Anyway, it's fine. So if you want to just talk about it, you can just talk about it, or if you want to share the screen as well, it's fine.
Okay, well, I'm gonna share the screen, and I have Chris Brennan's translation here of the Valens stuff that we're going to be looking at. So I may refer to that here and there, but I'm also going to use the free one that's online that everyone
Yeah.
can have
Please.
access to. So this is the Mark Riley translation. If you just search Vettius Valens Anthologies, you'll find it like right away on Google, and it's free. And it's like, you know, we're talking like 172 pages of free, ancient, awesome astrology text. So
Yeah, I think that's. I gave a link to Valence's anthology, the free translation in our previous
oh, you
video.
have? Okay, great.
So
Okay,
that
so
I think that's really it's a commendable job that he has done. So yes.
okay, cool. Yeah, let me just move things around a little bit. So yeah, Valens starts with the sun, and you know, you can kind of read along as we talk here. So yeah, Aswin, did you want to kind of kick it off?
You can start, but sun and the moon are luminaries, and pretty much in every tradition, the planets and their signification start with sun and moon. So, sun
Yeah.
is the basic source of energy to everything that is living or not living on Earth. So, not just Earth, but the entire universe. So let's start with Sun, and you can take over.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So, yeah, Valen starts with some like kind of esoteric, poetic stuff here that we've got the all-seeing sun, nature's fire and intellectual light, the organ of mental perception. So, basically what he's talking about, which he delves into later in the book in the chapter on zodiacal releasing, is that the sun primarily refers to something called nous, which is Nous, spelled in English that way at least, and it's a Platonic, Neoplatonic name for basically the soul of the universe, or the cosmic mind of the universe, the mind of God, basically. It is sort of the first differentiation out of the one, which is God without any aspects or disunity, or apparent disunity, I should say. So the nous, and it's very similar to what Parashara says in the Jyotish tradition, which is that the sun is the Sarvam Atman, which is the soul of all things. So it's pretty much the same thing, and sometimes you see it translated as intellect. Here it's translated as intellectual light. Later it's translated as cosmic mind. And I'm not 100% sure if the word used right here is nous, but we're basically getting a picture of nous. And so this tells us that Valens, at least, was thinking about the sun as, really the person's connection to the most divine, all-embracing qualities of existence. So a strong sun in the chart can basically bring these themes more forth for a person. And as a result of, being the most divine of the stars, right, it also indicates kingship, right? And then he goes rule, intellect, intelligence, beauty, in the sense of like Plato's form of the beautiful, this like Platonic transcendental form of beauty that underlies all of creation, not a Venusian beauty of like, oh, I'm attracted to,
This is
but
a
a beauty of
universal.
like, I love this and it awakens the light of God within me, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. Done. I just wanted to say that it's not the actual Venusian beauty. It's the actual universal beauty that we all feel within ourselves, and
Right, exactly.
it's directly related to our soul's connection to nature. So that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, beautiful. Soul's connection to nature. That's a good way to look at it. And so you're not going to find in Hellenistic astrology that the sun has to do with the ego, as it often does in certain modern trends that have emerged largely in the United States. It has absolutely nothing to do with the ego. In fact, the moon will have more to do with the ego, arguably. And we'll get to that in a moment. But so yeah, the sun is also associated with the father, just like in Indian astrology, the master, whatever that means. Yeah, friendship, definitely, because it's nobility, right? Noble personages and nobility, honor, and so on. And you can see all the things he's referring it to. And of course, there's thousands of more things, and we do find them in some of the other texts as well. Parts of the body rules the head. He says the sense organs, which is interesting, the right eye, and generally speaking, the right side of the body too. For those of you who study energy medicine, I think we can extrapolate that from what Valens is saying. Rules the heart. That's a pretty common association of the sun. Of the spiritual faculties, the perception. Again, that has to do with the just literally consciousness, right? Like literally just having any sort of consciousness at all that is self-reflective, or that is able to engage in actions that are self-directed. So that would be like willpower, like will in the sense of what it really means, like in the sense that will is like what ultimately governs everything else in us, not like raw willpower, like fighting against something, but like true will. And so, then we have a couple other things that he gives, like gold. That's a no-brainer. Fruits, wheat, and barley. These are like very pure substances that if you eat them are not going to cause any sort of harm to your body. Well, if you eat them just by themselves, kind of a thing. You generally don't want to eat fruit and wheat at the same time if you can avoid it. But he's referring to like very pure, simple foods. And the sun is essential. The sun just is what it is. It's very pure and simple in all of the things it manifests. There's nothing complex about the sun. And then it's of the day sect, which we talked about in the sect video, yellowish, because obviously that's kind of what it looks like in the sky, and bitter in taste, because bitter foods are often, again, they're very cleansing, they're very purifying, they very much help organs like the liver and so on. And yeah, I think that about does it. I want to talk about benefic, malefic in a moment, but I want to give you a chance to talk about the sun some more.
I think there's a lot of similarity in the ancient traditions as it is, because it's a lot more of what Parashara and Varahamira says in terms of the significations of sun, except for the fact that here we have sun is the master, but sun is the master, father is our first master. So I think that also makes sense, because no one says, no one really brings sun as master. People bring Jupiter or Saturn as master kind of thing. But I think this makes sense here, because father is our first master. And sun rules the heart, and that also makes, it's pretty much common in most of the traditions of astrology. And just going above, I think judgment, I think that's a bit new in terms of we say like judgment. I think some traditions put judgment with Saturn, and but here people, the Hellenistic stuff says it's with the sun. But I think that also makes sense, because sun directly relates to the government and all the authority related stuff related to government, not just government, but any other stuff that is related to authority. So judgment is probably the most like underlying factor of whatever authority we hold. So that's probably, that also makes sense. Public reputation, obviously, as it is Digbala, sun gains Digbala in the 10th house, and 10th house is the house of public reputation and fame. So
right.
Yeah, I think that's the same in Hellenistic stuff as well. Sun is super powerful when it is close to midheaven. So
yes.
So that makes a lot of sense. And action and authority. So action, most of the other traditions attach it to Mars, but here people have done it with sun. So there is one other difference that we can find. Authority is basically what sun offers. So if sun is beneficially placed in the chart, we rule and we have authority over the stuff related to that particular house, or whatever sun signifies as a part of its.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah, and the
I think, yeah.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and the sun, we do find Digbala elucidated in a raw form in Yavana Jataka, which is a text that takes quite a lot from Hellenistic traditions. And so even though Yavana Jataka is, an Indian text, it is still, it is, and we don't find Digbala necessarily in other Hellenistic texts. I think that, there's an argument to be made that perhaps it could be part of it, because it's in Yavana Jataka. So it certainly makes logical sense in terms of the Hellenistic stuff, even though, again, it's not explicitly in like Valens or something like that. So I always thought that was interesting. But as far as like malefic or benefic, it's interesting because in India, the sun is largely considered to be cruel, or what we'd call malefic. But in Hellenistic, it's kind of a mixed bag, because the sun is so important and noble and spiritual and stuff Actually, it is in both traditions, but like later medieval astrologers coming out of the Hellenistic tradition, like one of them, I forget which one, I think it was a Persian astrologer, talked about that. Basically, the sun is primarily malefic when it is in conjunction with a planet because it causes combustion. The planets get hidden behind the sun's rays, and we can't see them when they would rise or set. When the sun would rise or set, we cannot see them in the night sky or at dawn or dusk. And so that was an affliction. And then when the sun is opposing a planet, it is retrograde. It's basically what, is kind of causing a planet to be retrograde. So that's when the sun was most malefic. In a square aspect, it can be malefic or benefic, kind of depends on the planet it's associated with. And then in trine or sextile, it is more benefic. And it is more benefic when it has better dignity, like any planet, but the sun really becomes much more benefic when it has good dignity and much more malefic when it has really bad dignity. And within the context of the whole chart too, a sun in Libra in the 10th with a good aspect of Jupiter is not so malefic as a sun in Libra in the 12th with a difficult aspect from Saturn, for example. So sure. Everything in its proper place. But that's kind of the sun's kind of malefic benefic thing. And then again, getting back to the joy real quick, it joys in the 9th house. And the 9th house is the house of the emperors and kings in Hellenistic astrology, not the 10th. It's the 9th, because you had this notion of divine right of kings, like the king was a god man or the queen was a god woman or something like that. So 9th is really the emperor, and it's also the house of God. It is very much the house of God. And like we said, the sun being kind of the closest to the divine, ruling over the nous and the soul of all things and that sort of stuff. So it makes sense that it would joy in the 9th house. And yeah, sure. I think that does it for me on the sun. Do you want to say anything
but
else?
The sun is not a bad planet in 9th, but in Vedic astrology, sun in 9th is not considered to be good because of the Karako Bhavanashti concept, where
yes.
So it is not bad for everything, but it just brings about a little bit of separation or discomfort with father, because
absolutely
both 9th house and the sun signify father. So that is one thing, but it's not a contradiction, because
no, it's not.
Every position has its own like good and bad stuff. So not good and bad, but
right. And the sun in the 9th is really it's going to emphasize it's going to emphasize the divine.
The higher thinking
over the earthly father, the heavenly father over the earthly father. So it makes sense that the sun in the 9th could actually be difficult for the father, because in Jyotish, of course, the father is the 9th house. But in Hellenistic, the father is actually the 4th house. Now, I myself, I stick to the Jyotish tradition even when I'm doing Hellenistic techniques, but those of you who are new to this should know that the Hellenistics typically associate the father with the 4th house and arguably the mother with the 10th house. But, we can talk about that more when we talk about houses. And, oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, there's just like some subtle differences and stuff. And I think it sort of has to do with how the different cultures themselves thought about life. I think that's why there's these differences that we find,
Yeah. So then I think we should move to the next planet.
To the moon. Yeah.
Yeah. Moon is basically, I think the first thing, it's very prominent here, as they say, moon lit by the reflection of sun's light. So that is the phrase that both Parashara and Brahmira use. Like, moon is the planet that reflects sun's light, which is given here as the borrowed light. So yeah.
Right. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that the moon is a reflection of the sun's light. And so the moon is actually going to be, as we'll see, more associated with the body in general. than the sun is. Like the sun is the vitality that courses throughout the body, but the moon is more associated with the body because it's closer to the earth than the sun. You know, it's a reflection of the sun. It makes the sun's light perceptible. We can stare directly at the moon and see that sunlight. So the sun and moon in many ways are very interchangeable in Hellenistic, and we'll see that in certain techniques like I mentioned earlier. But already we see, you know, in a nativity indicates man's life body, right? So right there, it's like one of the first things. So it's more bodily than the sun. So again, moon is going to be more associated with the ego, what people call the ego, because the ego is really that, that changeable aspect of ourself that, like, just as the moon has these 27, 28, roughly 28 phases, right? It represents the changing aspects of matter and consciousness involved in matter. And so it's going to be associated with how our mind and our emotions are grabbed by different things. Our attention gets grabbed by different things and so on. Another way to think of it too is like the sun, if you take a circle, the sun is the center of the circle and the moon is the circumference of that circle, right? So the moon is more the outer, it's more the part of us that's associated with material things. And that's why if the moon is afflicted in a chart, it can mean really a lot of challenges for the person, because they will have a hard time associating with the realm of life, you know. And then if the sun's a lot stronger, they may want to escape more into the realm of spirit or something, you know, kind of an escapism sort of thing can happen. But you know, continuing on, or did you want to say anything about that?
No, I think that's pretty much the same thing that I wanted to say. Sun, moon is much more personal than sun. So which is why moon largely talks about our own nourishment and our inner self. And yeah, which is as it is, you said, a happy moon is a happy man, and an unhappy moon is not an unhappy, but still a little bit in distress and wandering about.
Absolutely, yeah, big time. And you know, it also rules over the mother. Okay, that's a really important one. And our mother typically is the one who nourishes us, especially from a young age. And there's something in Ptolemy called the Ages of Man. It's a very simple Time Lord technique, and it's very similar to the Vedic or the Indian technique of natural age dasha. And they both actually start with the moon. And so for Ptolemy's system, the moon rules the first 4 years of anybody's life. And those are those years where you're probably closer to your mother than ever.
Yes.
You know, after being born, she's breastfeeding you, she's nurturing you, or she's not. You know, there are plenty of cases where the mother's not present or something like that, and that's a whole other thing. But the point being is that the moon is, as the mother, it's really important for the person's nourishment and feeling safe and learning, like, to be comfortable in those early kind of primitive stages of childhood. So another reason why the moon, if it's afflicted, can create a lot of difficulty, because that means the mother wasn't there to be motherly and be nurturing and so on.
Yeah.
Conception, I guess, meaning probably, you know, getting pregnant and stuff like that. That makes sense. Beauty, I don't really know where that comes from. That's kind of interesting, but again, that's sort of like a reflection of we saw in the sun.
Yeah, I think luminaries have some kind of understanding the concept of beauty. So there is something that is attached with the luminaries. I can understand what they mean, like with both sun and moon. Again, it is not a Venusian beauty, but it is a beauty that lies behind behind a particular thing that we do. It's like where someone really gets happy when they are giving something. So it's the beauty lies in what we see in within ourselves and what we see within others in a close or a very like domestic circle.
Yep, definitely. And that relates to what it comes next, appearance and sight, meaning like things appearing, because as the sun shines light it has to be reflected by something, and the moon is that initial mirror of reflection. So the moon is like the appearance, like when the shadows appear from the light, just like in Plato's metaphor of the cave, which I recommend reading if you never have and you're interested in Hellenistic. Plato talks about how there's a cave where it's a metaphor for reality and how we're chained in reality, so to speak, and that people are chained to this wall such that they can only look ahead, and there's a fire above them, and there's people walking back and forth casting shadows on the wall in front of them, and so they think that the shadows are reality. So that kind of reminds me of what Valens is saying here. It could easily be a very subtle reference to the cave, that things are appearing. The moon is that initial appearance, and again, the moon rules over the realm of generation and corruption, which is the earthly realm. Basically, you'll find generation and corruption a lot in later medieval authors. So yeah, sight, just like the sun, we're going to see that it rules the left eye down here, right? So the other eye. Living together, nurture, the older brother. That's an interesting one that I didn't know about. Housekeeping, the queen, that makes sense. Housekeeping makes sense. The mistress of the house, possessions, fortune, and so on. All of these things having to do with other people. So living together. Again, the moon is the relationship. The moon naturally signifies relating to the world and thus to other people. So even though we use Venus to signify marriage, the moon is just that initial fact of relationship because it reflects the light of the sun, and it basically echoes esoteric doctrines of the one creating a reflection of itself, so to speak. And then, being born again through that reflection, the Hiranyagarbha, which is the egg of Lord Brahma, or the Orphic egg in the Greek tradition, this egg that, the divine kind of makes / becomes and then is born out of again as reality. So it's like this divine mother concept. And again, there's a two-ness here to the moon. There's a two-ness that's being emphasized, a bifurcation, assembly of people, the city, again, all things that are having to do with the world of form, multiplicity, not unity anymore, right? Not just oneness of the sun existing by itself. So that's where all this is coming from. I don't know where the older brother thing comes from. It's kind of interesting.
Older brother and there are a lot of things that are quite different that I'm seeing with regards to moon, because I can understand the mistress of the house, because mother is the mistress of the house and there is no
right.
So that is easily relatable. Queen, that's cool. Older brother, I think this is the first time I'm seeing that it has been given to moon.
Yeah, and Dorotheus doesn't give older brothers to the moon. He explicitly gives Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars to brothers, and Venus and moon to siblings. So when we read these old texts of any tradition, we have to think critically. And if something doesn't agree with our intuitive and intellectual understanding, we have to question it. And so I wouldn't really use the moon as the older brother.
I don't think I use. I never seen. Yeah, I've never seen moon as older brother. As it is, I don't think Chris Brennan also. He has mentioned as older sibling, but I think it is he has kind of given a footnote attributing to this text by Valens. So
okay, yeah, he says older sibling, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and if so, anyway, we continue on and we get gains. Well, we get people, which, that's a common one, that the moon rules the common people, especially in political astrology. But gains and expenses, right? This is the waxing, gaining things, gaining in light, and waning of the moon, receding in light, and so on, losing light. So that's very simple. And again, that's just associating the moon to the world of experience and form and ups and downs and so on. The household, yes, that's, where we feel safe and so on. Voyages and travel. That is a really important one. And wanderings. That comes from the fact that the moon is always wandering away from the sun, right, and coming back. And then it also comes from the fact that it joys in the third house opposite the sun, the house of the goddess, the house that is associated more with our personal relationship to the divine rather than the more universal relationship. So the third house is going to be more how we relate to our religion or God through a religion, or, you know, it's just that it's bringing divinity down to the more personal level. And again, third house is very much about voyages, as are all the cadent houses in Hellenistic astrology, not just the ninth. So anytime you find lots of planets in houses 3, 9, 12, and 6, they kind of all take a page from the moon joining in the third, and they signify travel or being in foreign, unfamiliar, and sometimes threatening places. So pretty cool stuff there. And then parts of the body, left eye, we talked about. Stomach, very, very important in my experience for the moon. You know, the stomach is where we digest things, and if we're emotionally upset, it's very hard on our stomachs, which has to do with, you know, feeding and nurturing children with breast milk and stuff. Breath is interesting. Spleen, I don't know. I usually associate that with Saturn. I don't know what other Hellenistic authors say on it. Dura mater, I don't know what that means. The marrow, that's interesting. The bone marrow.
Yeah.
Of materials, it rules silver and glass. Again, silver because it's sort of the opposite of gold. You know, the moon is silvery. Glass because it's see-through, and the moon is also definitely associated with mirrors and things see-through, and like fish tanks or water, anything that kind of is like that. And then it's the night sect. Green in color, that's kind of obscure. That's probably up for debate by other authors. Salty in taste. That to me does make sense. Do you want to say anything about this other stuff?
No, there is the silver and glass, which is a quite contradictory idea, because I think in Vedic astrology we see glass to be associated largely with Saturn or Rahu, and
Okay. Wow.
And silver is Venus. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I think it's mostly talking about not the color silver, but the actual metal silver. I don't know if it's... Okay.
I don't know. Maybe, yes. There is a little bit of difference in ideas here and there, but still I think overall it's quite the same.
Yeah, pretty damn similar. And, you know, again, salty in taste, I think that just reminds me of like the sea and the tides, which the moon is very much associated with.
That's very obvious.
Yeah, so that makes sense. The glass thing, again, is going to just be related to the fact that glass is like see-through, or it can be see-through, and it's not always see-through, but it's shiny and reflective. And so I think that's why.
Yeah, I think they have attributed it with the quality of reflectiveness. So, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so and the moon is typically, in my experience, most Hellenistic authors seem to say that the moon is benefic when waxing and malefic when waning, and it's the same in Jyotish as well. So pretty reliable technique in my experience. Okay, so Saturn, good old Saturn. Okay, here we go. The Hellenists are pretty down on Saturn. I'm not gonna lie.
I think there's a lot of negativity attached to the ancient stuff, especially related to the malefics bit. I think that's it is not good to take things in a very literal sense as they've given,
right?
Because I think life was much harder those days, and considering the era that they were living in, which is like 2000 years ago. So I think we should understand that we have moved far with a lot of technological improvements. So I think malefics are not as much malefics. Malefics are quite constructive these days. So
Yes, they can be. It's kind of a strange reversal of things, role reversal. But before we talk about Saturn, I wanted to say that Serapion of Alexandria, another Hellenistic astrologer, there's a wonderful little quote from him that says, "Whatever gifts Saturn brings, no other planets can take away." So even though Saturn is this harsh, cruel taskmaster for the Hellenistics, he is also, if you win something by Saturn, then you really got it. It's yours. It's not going anywhere. You put in the time and effort and work and that sort of a thing. So, and Saturn can produce kingdoms and a lot of power as well. You'll find that in other Hellenistic authors like Firmicus and probably other ones too. But yeah, let's just jump into it. So Saturn makes those born under him petty, malignant, careworn, self-deprecating, solitary, deceitful, secretive in their trickery, strict, downcast, hypocritical, squalid, black-clad, meaning wearing black, and kind of morbid, importunate, sad-looking, miserable, with a nautical bent, meaning toward sailing or working in the water and plying waterside trades. So pretty dour, pretty negative stuff that he starts out with. But we have to remember the era that this comes from. It was a much more, life or death kind of world. People did not, live as long. Surgical techniques. We didn't have life-saving surgical techniques like we do today, or not as advanced ones. And, Saturn is the planet that's coldest and darkest because he's furthest away from the sun and the earth, right? So and Saturn tropically too, he rules over the signs of winter, Capricorn and Aquarius. So as the zodiacs were roughly the same back then, Saturn would have naturally been associated for these astrologers with the cold and dark of winter too. So I will say that I have found all of these things to be relatively true, but if you read very carefully, even though it says things like malignant and stuff and deceitful, none of this is actually explaining the character of the person, like their true intentions and their true nature. The Hellenistic astrologers had many specialized techniques for discerning the actual nature and intentions of a person. So it's the type of thing where if Saturn is emphasized from a Hellenistic perspective, the person can have a tendency to be kind of downcast and like careworn and depressive and even sometimes deceitful or jealous. But it doesn't mean that like they're just a bad person, that like there's no good in them. It's just that they can have these tendencies, and I think that's a much more healthier and holistic way of looking at it, rather than trying to make this artificial like good and bad dichotomy that we often make. And I have a very prominent Saturn in my chart, actually in both sidereal and tropical. And I will do things like I've exhibited some of these traits for sure, but I will do things like I will wear clothes that have like rips and tears in them, and like shoes that are worn out because I just want to get the most mileage out of this stuff, because it's like, well, I can still use it. It's still working. It looks kind of crappy, but so that can be, like he says, careworn and stuff. It's like, that's true. It's just true. What do you say?
Yeah, I think it relates a lot to what you said. You are relating it with the real life scenarios and your own personal experience. But as you also mentioned very importantly, that none of these really talk about the actual character of a person or a characteristic
just qualities.
Yeah, these are just situations that we have to face in life, and there is no eternal bad situation or there is no eternal good situation, and that is what I think Saturn teaches. As you said about the Alexandrian astrologer that you said, like when Saturn gives, it really stays with us, and no one is there to take it away. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty much the idea of Vedic astrologers as well. That's what Vedic
Yeah.
astrology. So that's a universal thing. So yeah, and most of these things like imprisonment, griefs, chains, accusations, tears, bereavement, capture, subversion. Okay, that's a lot of negative stuff, but still,
Yeah.
these are associated with Saturn in all the traditions, and we can
Yeah.
easily relate to all these things. So Saturn causes like distress or depression and stuff. So, and they have also mentioned humbling. So that is the
Humbling. Yeah.
other, that's other side of the Saturn, which makes us kind of stay within ourselves and not jump too much of what we are or what we have done. So that's there. And sluggishness, that's the basic quality of Saturn. I,
Yes, he's
I,
slow. What he brings comes usually with time. He's the Lord
yes,
of time
yeah,
in
exactly.
general. So yeah, humblings, that's really important. He brings us to our knees and makes us realize what's really important through things like unemployment and obstacles in business and indeterminate lawsuits,
Yeah,
subversion of business, secrets, imprisonment, grief, and all this stuff here, tears and bereavement. And it's really like it's reminding us like what's important at the end of the day. These harsh experiences are the result of usually of it's just part of life, and it's kind of like how we take it, what we do with it, because Saturn is very slow moving. He's further away than any other planet, so he's very impersonal in his significations. It's very much like this sort of just has to happen because this is what is by necessity kind of needs to happen based on you know your actions or perhaps people in your life and how things are just going. Oftentimes it feels like it just has to happen, and we just have to go through these Saturnic periods so we can be humbled, so we can be reminded of what we are underneath it all. And Saturn typically is described as ruling the skeletal structure, right? The foundations of a building, let's say, like it doesn't have anything else added to it. So this is like emphasizing our foundations and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, continuing on, Saturn makes serfs and farmers because of its rule over land. This is a little different than Indian, where
yes.
Mars is typically the ruler of buildings and land, but
No, no,
Saturn
only
is,
land.
oh,
Buildings.
only land. Okay. Only land? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. But yeah, Saturn in this tradition rules over lands and structures because they are old and endure and are very basic things, right? Like they're not solar basic things, but they are like basic things of the earth, so to speak, or of the material existence. Um, there's this theme of submission, right? Serfs and farmers were mostly submissive in the past, and we don't really have serfs anymore. And then it causes men to be renters of property,
It's
right?
kind of sixth house stuff.
Yeah, submissive. So violent in action comes from being frustrated, not so much primary meaning, but it puts into one's hand great ranks and distinguished positions, supervisions, managements of others' property, and the fathership of others' children. So here we have kind of the empowering side of Saturn mundanely, where Saturn in good dignity and well placed can indeed bring some kind of estate or management of things that require a lot of responsibility. And you notice the fathership of others' children. Again, this is coming from Saturn's being removed from the earth and the sun, right? So it's others' children.
Yeah,
It's
I think that makes a
associated.
lot of sense.
Yeah. Of materials, it rules lead, which is pretty common traditional signification.
Hmm.
Wood and stone. Again, these are all like really, well, lead's a really kind of caustic metal, of course, but wood and stone, that's like the building blocks of a house, So very like the bone, the skeletal structure of a house, or a tower or something. In the body, it rules legs and knees because of Capricorn. Tendons, which I don't really fully agree with. Lymph, I don't agree with at all. And phlegm, this just, no, because usually these are associated with the moon. So I sometimes wonder if there's corruption in some of these texts, because that just doesn't make sense. Bladder, yes. Kidneys is more commonly associated with Venus.
Venus, yes.
Hidden organs make sense, of course, because Saturn does conceal things. Again, dark and cold. It's far out there. What is it hiding, you know? Saturn is hernia and spasms. Not too nice stuff. Possession. It's indicative of possession. So possession by evil spirits. Homosexuality and depravity. Well, in Chris's translation, he actually researched that word a bit more and found that it was about gender deviance, which is quite interesting. So Saturn will rule over like eunuchs, asexuals, and anyone who is gender deviant, which means in today's world, transvestites, transgender people, and things like that as well. It's not just homosexuality. But
I think it's a really good thing that he has mentioned.
Yeah. And then Saturn makes bachelors and widows, bereavements and childlessness simply because he is the planet of loss, because oftentimes through loss, we're reminded of what we really are. And we're reminded of how to stand on our own 2 feet without anyone else. Again, Saturn's the loner, you know, because of where he is in the solar system and whatnot, as I keep saying. So it's not that Saturn primarily signifies these things. It's that Saturn signifies these things kind of by extension, because let's be honest, oftentimes we forget what our foundations are, and we resist responsibility. We resist things that will remind us of, that go against our structural integrity, or people in our lives do that, or something, or there's even a more cosmic approach to it that, you know, it might not matter what we're doing or not doing too. But, you know, so it's difficult because of that. Violent deaths by water, yes, it's associated with drowning very often, again, because of the cold darkness. Strangulation, imprisonment, dysentery, falling on the face. Falling's a big one with Saturn for the Hellenistics, absolutely. It is the star of Nemesis. Nemesis was the deity that basically screwed up your stuff when you became too arrogant and got too haughty. It came and said, okay, you're being a little bitch, and you need to be reminded of your place in the scheme of things. You're not that important. So, you know, again, Saturn in its holistic aspect, it's a day planet, as we talked about in the second lecture, and it is like castor in color and astringent in taste. So, yeah, those things are just, you know, just investigate those things, and that'll make sense. I think that that fits very well personally. Did you have some things you wanted to say?
No, I think it's pretty much you already covered most of the things. So I think I had a lot of things, because in terms of negativity of Saturn, and I think I spoke in the beginning itself. So
okay, yeah, good stuff. All right, so we're moving on to Jupiter. And immediately with Jupiter, we get childbearing, which is also common to India. Jupiter is the karaka of children in Indian astrology. So yes, Jupiter is key for children, because children are reflective of great and good fortune, continuing the life stream, the life force, and so on. Children can help create prosperity and stuff, especially when they marry somebody wealthy, which was a big thing in the ancient world, and still arguably a thing in Eastern countries, I think. I mean, what is it like over there in India right now? Do people still marry based on like wealth and stuff?
No, wealth it depends, and it depends upon the culture and the society that you live in, because India is a very vast country with multiple or variety of cultures, where people have different understanding of different things. But I think
Good
social
point. Yeah.
status and wealth is still a major determinant in terms of marriage, because still marriages are being arranged in India largely. So I think a lot of family involvement and stuff will directly relate to wealth and social status. So it's pretty much
Cool.
existing. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So Jupiter, he is, again, he's expansion. That's kind of his main thing. And this what we're going to see here is very reflective of that idea, because Jupiter is a gas giant. He's practically a second sun. He exerts actually a considerable gravitational effect on the sun itself. I think he's the only planet to do that. And so Jupiter is basically, he's just this big, giant, fat, expansive planet. We get the word jollity from Jupiter. He's called Zeus, obviously, by oh, sorry, I shouldn't have opened that because I'm sharing the screen. I don't know what it said. What did you want to say?
No, just carry on. That's good.
Okay, my bad. Yeah, I'm not used to screen sharing. So anyway, engendering, I think, I don't really know what that means, to be honest. Desire, loves, political ties, acquaintance, friendships with great men, prosperity, salaries, all this stuff that you can read as we're talking about it, right? It's just like all these great, wonderful sorts of things that bring us together and engender this. Maybe it's engendering all this stuff that's kind of, generally auspicious. There's like a sobriety and goodness to a well-placed Jupiter, so to speak. It upholds the law and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Authority over temples, arbitrations, trusts, inheritance, brotherhood, fellowship, beneficence. It's the complete opposite of Saturn, basically. Relief from troubles, right? Whereas Saturn gets us into troubles. Release from bonds, freedom, deposits in trust, money, stewardships, all things that, give us prosperity and expansion and give us peace of mind and sort of create integrity and harmony of our entire life and body and so on. Body parts, it rules the thighs and feet. Because of Sagittarius and Pisces ruling those, which are its signs. It governs the race in games. Interesting. That is pretty interesting. I'll have to think about that more. Of the internal parts, it rules the sperm, the uterus, the liver, parts of the right side. Sperm's interesting. That makes a certain amount of sense. In Indian astrology, I think Venus is associated more with the sperm, but
I think Jupiter makes a lot of sense, because Jupiter is the significator of children, as it is.
So I think that makes sense too. Uterus, I can understand that to a degree, but I also associate the moon. I think we have to associate the moon with that too. Liver is pretty universal. Liver, its main function is to detoxify things. It's a detox organ. It helps get rid of toxins, but the liver has like over 100 functions or so, and the liver is so incredibly integral to the smooth running of every aspect of the body. It was one of the most important organs in ancient Greek and probably Ayurvedic medicine as well, if I had to guess. Yeah. So the liver is very powerfully important for health, and it helps to, again, it makes everything run smooth, so to speak, by its detox action. Materials, it rules tin, and that's pretty traditional. I don't really know much about where the metal associations of the planets comes from, other than Sun, Moon, and Saturn making abundant sense. But, if you read about tin, chances are it will make sense. Jupiter's a day planet, and it's gray verging on white. That's very odd. I don't know about gray, but sure, white. And it's sweet in taste. Yes, that is a pretty traditional thing, because, we feel good when we eat sweet things, and Jupiter is all about feeling good and doing good and blah blah blah. So I leave it to you.
No, there is one interesting thing, that is justice. I think Jupiter is actually the planet of justice, and Saturn is the planet of law. So
Yeah.
there is a kind of circular thing, or continuing thing between Saturn and Jupiter here. So and it's directly related to relief from troubles. So we get to
Yeah.
legal stuff and Saturn, and finally the next stage is justice that we get, and Jupiter helps us in having justice. So I think that's a very good thing. And the other thing that I wanted to say about is money stewardships is really interesting. And yeah, I was just wondering, because those days when king was not uh, solvent, or when king was not in a very good position to rule, so the next immediate person who will take over the reins of management will be the steward. So
Hmm.
I think Jupiter will probably be the most wise person to rule the king's court if sun is not around. So I think that also makes very good sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's similar to in Vedic astrology,
Yeah.
how Jupiter is a counselor and a
Yes.
guru and stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's a very similar thing. And again, Jupiter being so large, practically a second sun,
Hmm.
he is like, yeah, he's like the right hand man to the king, or he's like the wealthy man, whereas the sun is like the king, and they can come together, or they can rival each other. So
Yeah.
yeah, really good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, next we go to Mars, the planet of
Action.
action, right? Indicates force, as in like
But
willpower, like to do something,
there is one
right?
thing that I wanted to say is, like, Valence had given so much of stuff for Saturn, and he has given a little, very small thing for
Yeah.
Jupiter.
Well, and this is pretty common in Hellenistic because they just emphasize the negative so goddamn much. It's ridiculous. Uh, God, they really focus on that, like that little black spot on the painting that was kind of like
It's like
screwed
adding
up
salt to wound.
the painting. Yeah. Gods. Okay. Well, anyway, we're gonna
Uh,
we're gonna have fun with it anyway. So yeah, Mars indicates force, right? That centrifugal force moving outward, conquering, right? Overcoming any and all obstacles. It indicates wars, plundering, screams,
Why?
violence, whoring, the loss of property, banishment, exile, alienation from parents, capture, deaths of wives, abortions. Abortions is a major one. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
abortions, because it's like you're cutting things away and so on. Mars has to do with cutting. Love affairs, marriages. No, not really. Marriages in the sense of perhaps Valens may be referring to, sometimes Hellenistic astrologers use Mars as a significator for men or husbands in a woman's chart.
Yes, sure.
That
That's
is
that's the
a
actual
yeah.
ancient tradition. So I think
Yeah.
that's the same in Vedic and Nadi astrology. Yeah. So that,
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense and works well in practice. But
yeah.
yes, we can see like whoring and love affairs. Mars is like kind of the planet of a dharma, and Mars joys in the sixth house, which is the house of slaves and enemies. Not the seventh house. The seventh house is not enemies in Hellenistic. Just like in Indian astrology, it's the sixth house, which is
Mm.
enemies. So Mars is like sixth house. Mars is kind of like it's the house of bad fortune. It's the house that is like, going against what's sort of socially acceptable and whatnot. Um, and yeah, I forgot to mention Jupiter's joy, but we'll do that when we get to Venus, actually. Anyway, so yeah, so Mars joys opposite Saturn. Saturn's in the 12th, Mars is in the 6th. So you got the two malefics opposite each other there. And Mars is again quarreling and stuff like that. We're gonna see, yeah, lies, vain hope, strong-armed robbery, banditry, looting, quarrels amongst friends, anger, fighting, verbal abuse, hatred, lawsuits, all this stuff. And actually, I will bring in Jupiter's joy again here. Jupiter joy is in the 11th, which is the house of the good spirit, the guiding good spirit, and great good fortune, gains and whatnot, and friendships, real friendships. So Mars and the 6th house, that is the 8th from the 11th house, right? So it makes a lot of sense from the house perspective too, that Mars would sort of screw up the things of Jupiter 11th. Mars, Saturn is opposite Jupiter, but Mars sort of comes in and like screws everything up. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
violent murders, slashings, and bloodshed, fevers, ulcers, false oaths. Mars is really, in some ways, even more than Saturn, associated with lying. It's like Saturn will conceal things in the Hellenistic. It seems like Saturn will like hide things and have secrets, but Mars will deliberately lie to get what it wants and to fuck things up. That's what they're saying, I think. It's pretty funny. Wandering, very important. Along with the moon, Mars is also considered when it comes to traveling and wandering in foreign, obscure places, because Mars is that action. Mars gets us out of our comfort zone. It's movement. It does not like to sit still, and so on. And just all this other stuff, fire or iron work, craft work, sure, masonry, building. Mars is the builders. Mars is the warriors, the athletes, and the builders, because it's about exertion, physical exertion. Mars commands campaigns and leadership, infantrymen, and hunting and wild game. Later on, hunting is associated with the sun because it became a sport of kings and emperors and stuff. But yes, Mars, killing and shooting anything is very Martian.
Yeah.
Falls from heights like Saturn. So, both malefics are associated with that. Or attacks from animals. We find that in other places too. Weakened vision and strokes. Yes, very much strokes. That makes sense. It's a very sudden affliction usually. Mars rules the head, maybe because of
That's
Aries.
a contradiction. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, because of Aries, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That.
The seat of not, maybe, I don't know, the butt, I don't know. But the genitals make sense because of Scorpio. And then the internal parts, it rules the blood. And then sperm, ducts, bile, yes, very much the gallbladder, which bile is corrosive. It breaks things down. So that's very Mars. Elimination of excrement, pushing things through, parts in the rear and back and underside, interesting. Controls the hard and the abrupt. Yes, it's very like that. Of materials, it rules iron. That's the classical one because iron is like a red, sort of ruddy metal. Decoration of clothing, that doesn't make any sense to me. Wine and beans, interesting. Don't know about that, but maybe. And then it is of the night sect, and it's red in color and acidic in taste. Yes, makes very much sense. So, what do you have to say about this stuff, my man?
I think I have a lot to relate with nodes for what they've given with Mars.
Oh, okay.
I think force, wars, plunderings, screams, violence, and stuff. I think those are all Martian, but loss of property, I think I'll take it with nodes.
Okay.
Banishment, I think banishment and exile kind of makes sense. But I think I can also associate that with Saturn. So, as it is, Saturn is the farthest planet from the luminary. So, I think I can easily relate that to Saturn. But it's what the Hellenistic astrologers have given. So, abortions is quite obvious. Love affairs, I can agree with that. And marriage is fine. Loss of goods, again, loss, any kind of losing something, I think I'll directly associate with the nodes. And
that makes sense. And what I want to say too is you're seeing as you follow along that there's some overlap with these planets like Mars and Saturn, both referring to falls, for example. And so what this does is that as you practice and become familiar, when you see like two planets coming together you know that the things that they overlap in, like Saturn and Mars and falls, right, then that can become more of a reality for the person if we were just doing pure predictive astrology and so on. And same with the things you're saying about the nodes, because we're not going to get deep into the nodes in this video, but in Hellenistic astrology, by and large, the nodes, both of them, are very destabilizing malefic factors, just like in Indian astrology. And so, Valens himself says that the nodes, especially the North Node, really weakens the sign that it's in and the house that it's in and the planets it's with. So that can make things unstable and prone to suddenness and loss. And then if Mars or Saturn are involved, it can, add to that, of course. And so it's very important to see where things overlap and to think critically about this stuff, as Aswin and I are doing right now, because, we don't agree with everything. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that, we have to think critically, and does this agree with what we reasonably know about astrology or not? These are very old texts, and sometimes they can be corrupted, or the translation can kind of be strange. Greek does not easily translate to English. So some of these words, there may be a better translation for them, and then it may be something that we would agree with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a valid point. So, yes. So,
And
as
finally, go ahead.
No, I just said I can associate a lot with the nodes for what they've given to Mars. So, yeah.
Sure,
I think
and that makes sense. Yeah.
Venus.
But the last thing I will say is that because Mars is a night planet, it is more associated with the subjective lunar half of life, right? So when it says Mars is, about loss and stuff, it's more like the loss that results from your own meddling, I think, your own actions, whereas Saturn is more loss that's the result of just kind of the flow of time and other factors like that. So, yeah. Okay, moving on. We come to Venus, desire and love. Like, yeah, couldn't fit better.
Positive stuff.
Indicates mother and nurturing. Again, this is an overlap with the moon, and in there is a technique that says in a day chart the Venus is the mother, and in a night chart Moon is mother, and in a day chart Sun is father, and in a night chart Saturn is father. So it's kind of indicating that, I think.
Okay.
And, overlapping with the moon, Venus even looks kind of like the moon if you can actually see it through a telescope when it's in certain phases. It's really amazing. It looks like a tiny little moon, like a crescent. It makes priesthoods similar to Indian astrology again. School superintendencies, similar to what Jaimini says about Venus, indicating education. So we have some major overlap between India and the Hellenistic tradition here. High offices with the right to wear a gold ring or a crown, because Venus is very much associated with shiny, sparkly, beautiful ornaments and things, right? Cheerfulness, friendship, companionship, the acquisition of property, ornaments, agreements on favorable terms, marriage, of course, trade, fine voice, taste for music, sweet singing, beauty, painting, and all this other stuff. Venus is the planet of centripetal action. It's going within, whereas Mars was going without. So Venus is about creating that inner harmony, that inner beauty. Venus is about desires for specific things, right? Whereas Moon is the general desire that comes out of wanting to be comfortable and safe. Venus goes, ooh, I like that. It's pretty. Ooh, that tastes good. I want more of it, and that kind of a thing. And that's, that's very common, like Venusian sort of traits. And, Venus and Mars complement each other. They're the more sexual planets and whatnot. Did you have anything to say about that stuff? Oh, I can't hear you.
Okay, is it okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I think this is a small glitch that I'm battling with, but
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay. Sometimes it cuts out. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go on, go on.
Okay. Inventors and masters of crafts, as well as craftsmanships or trade and work in emeralds, precious stone, and ivory. I think that this is more like I usually associate these things, inventors and mastery of craft and trade, with Mercury. But I
Yeah,
think that what Valens is hinting at here is that Venus, it causes love and passion to whatever it touches. And so I think to be a master of a craft and to work in trading like precious stones too and stuff, like you kind of have to be passionate about it, maybe. I don't know.
I think there are a lot of things that we can see from here, because the precious stones and stuff, they are all very much Venusian, but
Yeah.
that actual trade thing relates to Mercury. So the craftsmanship and the love for these precious stones and stuff might come from Venus, but I think the trade is a lot with Mercury. So
Yeah, me too.
yeah.
Cool. So Venus causes men to be gold spinners, gold workers, again, the finer things in life. Barbers, that's about aesthetics and appearance, another very Venusian thing that we see at least in a lot of astrology. People fond of cleanliness and toys. That
Okay.
sounds kind of kinky. Okay, but no, it probably isn't meant that way. Actually, it's probably just meant pretty literally. Um, it bestows the office of supervisor of weights and measures. Interesting. Markets and factories and giving and receiving of gifts. Yes, very Venusian. Absolutely. Laughter, good cheer, ornamentation, hunting in moist places. Maybe fishing or something like that, like a more benign sort of form of
Yeah.
hunting.
Hmm.
I don't know. It gives
I
benefits
think
from
I think
oh
that's
yeah.
that's what you said. The wet and moist places, because Venus is exalted in Pisces, so that's
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah, and you could imagine also somebody like going into some kind of moist environment and harvesting like some kind of rare herbs or something like that,
hmm.
or fungi even that I could imagine something like that too with
I think Venus
Venus.
is a moist planet of the
Very much, yeah.
night sect. So I
Yes.
think that's what he means. Yes.
Right. So it gives benefits from royal women or from one's own, meaning benefits from women in your family or your wife or your sister, whatever, things like that, women in your circle. It brings very high rank when it operates in such affairs. And we actually find Venus later on associated with the color purple too, which is which was a color of royalty in the ancient world, in this part of the world. So, and a good example of that, real quick, is just Prince had a very, very prominent Venus, and of course, Prince was the master of purple, Purple Rain, Purple Guitar, all that stuff. He was just obsessed with purple, so he was a very famous uh, purple wearing person, just like Venus gives it according to Valens and stuff.
Hmm.
It rules the neck because of Taurus, face in terms of cosmetics, I think, lips, sensuality, right? Sense of smell. Again, that's like perfumes, that harkens to like perfumes and stuff to me. The front parts of the feet to the head, probably maybe because of like Pisces or something. I don't know where the head comes from, but parts of intercourse, of course, yes, reproductive organs like
Sure.
the testicles and the ovaries specifically, and and whatnot. Inner parts, it rules the lungs. Usually that's associated with Jupiter.
Yeah.
I don't really know where that's coming from, so that's interesting. It is a recipient of support from others and of pleasure. Yes, is very passive and receptive.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Materials, it rules precious stones and fancy jewelry. Again, harmony, aesthetics, beauty, all domains of Venus. Of fruits, it rules the olive. Um, that actually does make sense to me. Olive oil is very wonderful thing in many ways. It's white in color, night sect, and greasy in taste, which is interesting. Although I tend to associate it with I mean, greasy kind of makes sense because greasy foods, you want more of them. They're like stimulating and whatnot. And the
Yeah.
white in color is kind of maybe just associated with the sort of like the purity of Venus.
Mm.
It's just like a very like, I don't know,
Yeah, sure.
something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, I think Venus shines. It's a white light, like what has been shown in the Lord of the Rings, the elves kind of thing. That's quite Venusian. So whenever we talk about Venus, I try and relate it to the elvish part of the Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh yeah, totally. That makes so much sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
I cannot
And
stop thinking about it. And the
yeah.
even star and stuff, everything is directly Venusian, and it's beautiful. So
Yeah, and I have noticed that Venus really heavily influences the spiritual life in a night chart, sometimes more than Jupiter even, because Venus also has that signification over, because it's like the night benefic, it's like the
yeah,
signification over like the more personal side of religion and spirituality. And so I've seen Venus in several night charts indicate spirituality more than Jupiter would, yeah, for those people that I'm
yeah,
thinking of. So it's a very interesting thing to consider. And finally, Venus joys in the fifth, which is the house of good fortune. And so, it's also a house that is associated more with, um, self-initiated activities and things, whereas it's opposite Jupiter joining in the 11th, which is that great good fortune coming from friends and associations with the outer world and supplication of the divine, or the daimon, as they call it, the guardian angel. So yeah, you're ready to move on to
sure.
Mercury?
Mercury.
Okay, cool. Oh man, yeah, this is
I
a
think this
pretty
is the last sign.
yeah, this will be the
Okay.
last for this video, and we'll probably have to do another video on dignity and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. There is the essential
Yeah,
dignities and stuff. I think that's a separate video altogether.
yeah, because we have all these indications, and we need to know how they're going to manifest, of course, and that's where things like dignity come in, and of course rulership come in of houses and lots and things. So,
Sure.
okay, finally, Mr. Mercury.
Messenger of
Indicate
gods.
Yes, messenger of gods. Mercury joys in the first house, which is the midway between um the the above the horizon and below the horizon, right? So Mercury, in the sect video, we talked about how Mercury can be of either sect, and Mercury can also be benefic or malefic depending on if he's associated with a benefic or a malefic. So he swings either way, he's very very much hermaphroditic, kind of asexual planet, and it's very similar to Indian astrology in that sense.
Yes.
And
And I
so
just made the
yeah.
Mercury retrograde video yesterday, and today we are
Oh,
talking.
cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Hmm.
Um, and gender wise, Mercury is kind of neutral gender, similar to an Indian. But one thing I forgot to mention for gender is Saturn is typically given the male gender by the Hellenistics, but in Indian astrology,
It's
he's
feminine.
neuter or neutral.
No, some
Feminine?
say some attach it to the feminine. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think there's like one text or something that does that, but a lot of them attach it to masculine. A lot of them do. Not that one's right and one's wrong necessarily. I follow the Indian system and say that Saturn's neuter or neutral, like Mercury myself. But anyway, that's for another discussion perhaps. But
Yeah.
okay, so on to Mercury. He indicates education. And that's honestly like primarily, that's like such a primary signification for Mercury: education, learning, taking in facts, right? Communicating. So letters, disputation, disputation in the sense of arguing about like philosophy or things over reason, not like Mars, where Mars is just
Yeah.
like screw you, I just want to stir up shit. Mercury is like, no, like I don't. That's not logical. Like,
Fighting
what are you even?
over logic and
Yeah.
rational.
Brotherhood. This makes sense because Mercury is sort of like he's naturally associated with just like sort of other people that are around, and our siblings are people that are around. He's also kind of the natural significator of friends too. And friends are kind of, can kind of be like brotherly or sisterly too. Interpretation, again, analyzing things, right? Embassies, where people are coming together to talk about affairs and whatnot. Number, so very scientific, very much measuring. Accounts, geometry, markets. Youth. Yeah.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah, and that makes sense from Ptolemy's Ages of Man. Mercury is the second ruler of life after the moon at a very young age. Games, yeah, Mercury just kind of screws around. Theft, especially when with Mars. Association, again, this is like the communication kind of aspect. And of course, right after we have communication. Service, gain, discoveries, obedience, sports, and wrestling. This is important, especially when associated with Mars and Venus, especially in other Hellenistic texts like
Exactly, because I think games, sports, and stuff are directly related to Mars, but I'm not sure why it is being done. There should be a rationale, but I'm not really sure why it is associated to.
I think because Mercury is the natural significator of skill, a high degree of skill, and so that could be part of why they did that. But that's a pretty common thing in several Hellenistic texts. It's quite interesting. And all this other stuff is kind of just, again, it's just like, I mean, versatility is a good one to remember. Mercury can do a lot of different things. People who are ruled by Mercury do a lot of different things. I cannot tell you how many different things I have studied and participated in. It's just kind of dysfunctional at a certain level when you get down to it. Geminis are constantly too. I'm not a Gemini, but Geminis they're doing everything. They're studying everything, just so many things. Very, very common thing. Gemini, a rising or a prominent Gemini. It is bestower of forethought and intelligence. Yes.
I think I love that.
it is prophetic. It can be a prophetic planet. It can be intuitively, and that's very much similar to the Indian tradition called Bud or Buddha, right? Buddhi, the intuitive, the intelligent will, wisdom and that sort of thing. But it's not really wisdom in the way that Jupiter is. It's more about, it's a mental thing. Jupiter is more of a living wisdom.
I think it is a logical and intellectual wisdom, while Jupiter is the actual greater wisdom.
Yes. So if you keep looking at this stuff, it's just a ton of stuff. I'm going to skip through some of it, but I love this. Doctors, secretaries, orators, philosophers, architects, musicians, prophets, diviners. What you're seeing here is a very diverse series of things, professions that Mercury can rule over, right? It can be a secretary or it can be a physician, very diverse, and they reflect different sides of Mercury very much. Those in charge of war and strategy, right? Strategy is definitely Mercury, whereas Mars is let's just go and kill people.
Yes,
Mercury,
Mars.
No, we have to plan how we're going to kill people. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. Mercury plans how to kill. Yes.
Undertaking anything unusual, super important. Mercury is about innovation. Wherever Mercury is, you will find something innovative, and ingenious if it's poised to give that. But everyone has that to a certain extent in their life, even if it's like something minor, right? Systematic work in accounting or with reasoning, systematizing. Again, that's a very Virgo kind of thing too. In modern parlance, that would be a Virgo thing. Mercury makes weightlifters and mimes. Those are not related at all. I love it. They're like two completely different things. And that's something to remember with Mercury. He's paradoxical. He's sudden and strange, unique, hermaphroditic, right? Non-gendered, really. He can go in between the underworld and the waking world. Like in the myth, he shepherds souls into the underworld. He's the messenger of the gods, right? Hermes, Mercury. It rules those skilled interpreters of the heavens, so astrologers. Okay, Mercury is the planet of astrologers for Hellenistic and medieval Persian astrologers. Winning charm, amazing feats, but all for the sake of gain. Mercury's a trickster. The stars' effects go in many directions. Again, diverse. Think diverse with Mercury. Knowledge for some, selling for others, service for others, trade or teaching for others. So again, very social. Mercury is very social. That's what's being emphasized here. Temple service, still for others. To some, it grants authority, rentals, labor contracting, rhythmical performance, the display of public service, and so on and so forth. But again, very diverse stuff, all hinting at what planet is most influencing Mercury.
Yeah, exactly.
Sign.
Yes, because
Yes.
Mercury is always like kind of influenced by some planet in the chart. So I think
Right.
there is a collection of everything that is given here as signification of Mercury.
And why is that? Again, part of it is because he's so quick, right? He is the quickest planet besides the moon. So being so quick, he's very changeable and that sort of thing. But he's never very far from the sun. And that's also, you know, an important factor we'll talk about when we talk more about combustion and things like that.
Dignities and stuff, yes.
Yeah. Even more, it causes those having this star in malefic signs or degrees to become even worse. So unfortunately, with Mercury, it's like the mind screwing things up, right? As for the end result, he'll make everything capricious in outcome and quite disturbed. So oftentimes Mercury is meddling in places he shouldn't be, curiosity killing the cat, right? Body parts, it rules the hands, right? That's how we invent things, and that's, you know, that's how we do so much of what we do. That makes sense. Shoulders, fingers, all Gemini stuff. Joints is very interesting. Joints is where things connect, right? So the connectivity of things. I actually didn't know that one, so that's very useful, I think.
I think I would associate joints with Venus because Venus is the planet of union, and I thought it's Venus, but here it's Mercury. But yeah,
I can understand. That's logical too. I think intuitively, joints and Mercury just seems to be working for me right now. So I'll let you know if I discover anything with that. But the belly, I don't know where that comes from. Sense of hearing, sure. Although could also associate that to Jupiter as well, as it is in the Indian tradition. Arteries, which makes sense. It's bringing things, you know, it also is said to rule the central nervous system, which helps the body communicate electrical impulses and whatnot. Intestines, this is a big one. This is a Virgo thing, and it's also a Scorpio thing for the large intestine, but the intestines in general is Virgo. It's where all the food is, right? It's like processed. The nutrients are taken out. They're separated from the things that the body can't process, and they're wrapped in, you know, they're digested. And then the stuff that we need to get rid of is wrapped in a mucus, which, you know, is what allows stool to be solid and stuff. So very mercurial thing. It's like a little factory of like, okay, we're going to pull out all the good stuff, like package the bad stuff and get it out of here, you know. The tongue, because of speaking, that's pretty obvious. Of materials, it rules copper and all coins used in buying and selling. So yes, being mercantility, it's not a real word, but it is now. Mercantility, buying and selling, right? So anything like that,
yeah, that's quite obvious. Buying and selling, Mercury.
Exchanges, yes, for the gods make exchanges, okay? That's an interesting one to contemplate. And it is blue in color and sharp in taste. I don't know about the blue in color, but sharp in taste, maybe. I'm not sure.
Sharp in taste.
Yeah. And then at the end here, or did you want to say anything else about Mercury?
No, I think that's
We got it.
Told a lot. Is
all right, cool. So
And there is Mercury, the ruler of law, but I think we also saw some,
yeah,
yeah.
Jupiter. Yeah, Mercury can be involved in like something like a
Yes,
lawyering profession, absolutely, where you
sure.
have to argue for something. But yeah, we can see here that he ends with a little passage on the planets. That's nice. The moon becomes the ruler of foresight, the sun the ruler of light, Saturn ruler of ignorance and necessity. Again, the goddess Nemesis is associated with that. Jupiter, the ruler of rank, crowns, and zeal. Mars becomes the ruler of action and effort. Venus, the ruler of love, desire, and beauty. Mercury, the ruler of law, friendship, and trust. These stars have their own effects, and then it trails off. Perhaps some of the text is missing, but these are some pretty nice little summaries that he gives down here
Yeah,
too, and I would tend to agree with them at least generally.
sure.
So I think that does it for us. That was a pretty epically long
Yes, I think
conversation.
it's more than 2 hours or stuff, but I think we did a very a detailed and a formidable explanation in terms of the planets and their significations. So this is probably the
Yeah,
establishment that we have given for our series. So uh,
good stuff. Yeah.
you may just stop the screen sharing now. So
Oh,
if you
okay.
don't have anything else, yeah, exactly.
No, I don't think so. I think that'll do it.
Okay, so as it is, we have given a really good establishment and a platform by doing these planets and their significations video. I think Vettius Valens has given a great route through his PDF, not through his PDF with Mark
Through
writing
his PDF, yeah,
through Mark
for
writing
sure.
book. Yeah, and Chris Brennan has given a lot of stuff, and I think I'll be getting my book that I've ordered, which is Dorotheus of Sidon, translated by Benjamin Dykes.
Oh,
So
great,
that's
yeah.
another thing that I'll be using, and it's going to be a lot of Hellenistic stuff going forward. So, and okay, so you have
Cool.
final thoughts as it is? Anything?
Um, yeah, final thoughts are that we chose to focus on Valens's treatment of the planets because, from my knowledge, it's kind of like the fullest treatment of the planets, just as far as like a list goes from the Hellenistic authors. But all of the other authors too, like you'll get more about the planets as if you read like in Firmicus, he talks extensively about when the planets are placed in certain ways, or if you read in Rhetorius, the same thing, like the planets in the various houses and so on. You'll learn more and more about how the planets behave, and then of course as you sort of test out the Hellenistic perspectives and stuff, you can see like how they manifest and how they work, and just get familiar with it. So
Sure,
I think that's it. Yeah.
exactly. And we'll come back with the zodiac video next time, and yeah,
Great.
that's it.
Okay.
That's it for this time, and bye bye.
All right.